My name is Laurie Valverde, and I was 27 years old when my father finally looked me in the eye and made it clear that I wasn't his daughter anymore. At least, not in the way that mattered to him. Not as a woman he respected, not as a successor, not as someone he believed capable of carrying our family's business into the future. Just another name on the payroll, a name he could scratch off whenever it suited him. That realization didn't hit me all at once. It dripped in, slowly accumulating over years of small cuts, side comments that stung more than they should have, advice disguised as insults, and an undertone of disappointment that never seemed to go away. I used to tell myself I was imagining it, that I just needed to try harder, be better, prove myself more. But the truth had been there the whole time. I had simply been too desperate for his approval to face it. Growing up, my dad was never the gentle let's play in the yard type of father. He was the wake up at 5 a.m. because sleep is for the weak type. The stop crying, nothing happened to you type. He carried himself like the world owed him obedience, and he ran our HVAC company the same way with a death grip on every employee, every decision, every wire transfer. He loved to tell the story of how he built the business from ashes. I learned much later those ashes looked a lot more like seed money from his uncle and favors from his college fraternity brothers. But even then I gave him credit. He was ruthless, efficient, aggressive. He charmed clients in boardrooms and tore apart warehouse workers for using the wrong brand of duct tape. People respected him, or feared him, usually both. My mother was the only person who ever softened his sharp edges. When she died suddenly when I was 15, everything about him hardened. His voice, his rules, his expectations. And my life shifted under the weight of it. Instead of football games or weekends with friends, I spent Saturdays answering phones at the office. After school, I stocked inventory in the warehouse. He called it building character. I called it what it was, child labor with a glossy label. But I did it. I did all of it. Because deep down, I believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed long enough, proved myself enough, maybe one day he'd look at me the way he looked at his business with pride. Maybe he'd finally see me not as an inconvenience, but as his daughter. By the time I was 22, I'd earned a degree in business operations. I'd gotten offers, good ones. A logistics firm in Chicago, a fast-growing tech company in Denver, real opportunities. But when I told my dad I was considering them, he looked at me like I'd slapped him across the face. "After everything I've done for you," he said, his voice low and sharp, "you want to abandon your own family's legacy? You'd rather be a number in someone else's spreadsheet than have your name on the building here." It cut deeper than I wanted to admit. And so, like always, I folded. I stayed. I started in dispatch, then moved into warehouse coordination, then inventory. I threw myself into certifications, supply chain management, logistics, optimization. I implemented new scheduling software that reduced delivery delays by 14% within 6 months. I restructured supplier contracts. I brought in new clients through digital marketing strategies he didn't understand, but tolerated as long as I kept them simple for his old school employees. And I never complained. Not when he took credit for my work. Not when he corrected me in front of clients. Not when he repeated my ideas weeks later as if they were his own. I kept telling myself it didn't matter who got the spotlight as long as the company grew, as long as he eventually saw the value in me. But the first real crack, the one I couldn't smooth over, showed up at our annual company dinner. The banquet hall glowed with gold chandeliers. Clients in tailored suits mingled with technicians who scrubbed grease off their hands for one night. My father loved this event. It was when he stood on the stage, bourbon in hand, recounting his favorite story, how he alone built legacy HVAC. That night, he called up employees one by one to thank them. The warehouse manager, a dispatcher, even the barista who delivered coffee twice a week. And then at the end, he raised his glass. "And to my daughter Laurie," he said with a smirk. "She's been a good sport about the whole trial by fire thing, huh? Maybe one day she'll even run this place if she grows a thicker skin." People laughed. I laughed too. What else was I supposed to do? Stand there and look hurt. Cry. Walk out. But inside, something cracked. Something small and quiet, like a splinter slipping under skin, not debilitating but impossible to ignore. I wasn't asking for applause, just acknowledgement, a simple thank you. That night, after the crowd thinned and the music softened, I found him at the bar, nursing a bourbon. The ice clinked against the glass as he swirled it. "Did you mean it?" I asked. "About me running the company someday." He didn't look up, didn't smile, didn't even blink. "You've still got a lot to prove, Laurie. Being my daughter doesn't guarantee anything." There it was, Not cruelty, not disappointment. Just indifference. The kind that stings worse than any insult. I should have walked away then saved myself from the years of heartbreak that followed. But I clung to the hope that he'd eventually come around. That if I just worked harder, stayed longer, endured more, he'd finally see me. I didn't know then that the moment he truly looked at me would be the moment he fired me. And that the collapse of everything he ever built would begin the second he pushed me out. The months after that company dinner felt heavier than anything I had expected. My father's behavior, once merely dismissive, sharpened into something almost pointed. It was as if the closer I got to being indispensable, the more determined he became to prove that I wasn't. The company was expanding into commercial contracts, which meant pressure coming from every direction. Long hours, intense bids, last-minute changes. It all landed squarely on my shoulders. I spent 16-hour days coordinating subcontractors, reviewing contracts, repairing billing issues that could have tanked entire quarters. I didn't complain, not once. I wanted him to see that I could handle it, that I was capable of running this company the way he once hoped his child would. Meanwhile, he drifted in and out of the office like someone whose only duty was to make an occasional appearance. He traveled constantly, had lunches with golf buddies, came to meetings only long enough to interrupt them or redirect them. He even changed his email signature to founder and visionary, as if he had transcended the need for day-to-day work. It wasn't inspiring, it was delusional. The breaking point arrived during a Q2 performance meeting I had spent weeks preparing for. I put together a comprehensive presentation, projected growth trends, cost-cutting strategies, client acquisition metrics. The team was actually engaged, asking questions, taking notes. For a moment, I felt like my work might finally be recognized. Then my father walked in 20 minutes late, coffee in hand, looked at the screens and asked, "Did we order lunch yet?" No acknowledgement, no interest, just the casual dismissal of everything I had poured myself into. And the meeting dissolved around his indifference the way it always did. Afterward, he pulled me aside and told me I was coming across too soft, too corporate, and that people here respect toughness. I stared at him puzzled. I didn't understand what he wanted. Was I supposed to yell at employees? Fire someone arbitrarily, just to show dominance? He laughed as if my confusion proved his point. He said I needed more backbone. I walked away with my jaw clenched hard enough to hurt, realizing that whatever standard he expected me to reach, he was never going to acknowledge that I was already surpassing it. 6 months later, on a rainy Thursday morning, everything came to a head. We had nearly lost a major contract, and the scramble to recover ended with me pulling 2 sleepless nights to renegotiate the terms, fix the numbers, and save the quarter. It was the kind of moment that should have earned gratitude, maybe even respect. When I arrived that morning, exhausted but proud, I was summoned to the conference room. Several department heads were already seated, looking down at the table or at their hands. My father sat at the head like a judge, preparing to deliver a verdict. "Laurie," he said, folding his arms, "this isn't working." I asked what wasn't working, but he didn't bother with specifics. He told me I had become a distraction, that people were starting to think I was running the show, and that this wasn't how he built the company. When I asked, stunned, if he was firing me, he didn't flinch. "Effective immediately," he said. I tried to ask why, after everything I had done, after everything I had taken on, but he didn't let me finish. He slammed his hand on the table and said, "Because I said so. You're replaceable, Laurie. You always have been." I felt the air shift in the room, the uncomfortable stillness of people who knew something was wrong but would never speak up. I realized then that he would never see me as anything more than an inconvenience he tolerated until it no longer suited him. I left without arguing, without crying, without taking anything with me except my phone and my keys. The rain was coming down so hard it blurred the parking lot lights. I sat in my car, listening to thunder roll across the sky, thinking how appropriate it felt that a storm would show up just as everything I had built, everything I had held together, was being torn away. For the next hour, I drove aimlessly before stopping behind a 24-hour diner I used to visit in college. I sat there watching raindrops slide across the windshield. That was when guilt settled in. Not guilt over what I had done, but guilt over what I had allowed. All those years spent enduring his belittling, accepting credit for things I had accomplished, being passed to him, staying silent while he pushed good employees to their breaking points. I kept thinking if I worked harder or proved myself more, he would eventually change. But he never did. He never wanted to. Over the next few weeks, I withdrew from everything and everyone. I didn't update my LinkedIn. I didn't respond to messages from coworkers. I didn't even talk to my cousin Jake, who had always been like a brother to me. I spent each day staring at job boards, opening and closing tabs, in a loop that felt endless. It wasn't about money I had savings. It was about meaning. I didn't know what the next chapter looked like without the company that had defined my life since childhood. When I finally answered Jake's third missed call, I wasn't prepared for what he told me. His voice was unsure, almost strained. Things were strange at the office, he said. And then he admitted that my father had offered him my position, the role I had built from nothing, the role I had poured my soul into. He tried to soften it by saying he hadn't said yes, at least not yet, but he also hadn't said no. Hearing him say that hurt more than I expected. I didn't shout or accuse him. I just told him I understood, even though inside it felt like one more fracture in a foundation already collapsing. He suggested we get lunch soon. I told him I needed space. And that was the last time we spoke for a while. The silence that followed felt strangely heavier than the firing itself. It was as if everything around me had stopped moving. Then one morning, an email from Sophia, one of our senior account managers, appeared with the subject line, "You might want to see this." What she sent changed everything. Sophia's email came early in the morning, carrying only a brief note, "You might want to see this," and a forwarded attachment. I opened it expecting something small, maybe internal gossip, or a poorly phrased memo. Instead, the document filled my screen and sent a tight burning pressure through my chest. It was an HR announcement drafted and approved by my father. According to the memo, I hadn't been fired at all. I had stepped down amicably to pursue other interests. It thanked me for my years of contribution. It praised the smooth leadership transition. And then in the final paragraph that made my breath stall, mid-inhale, it proudly announced Jake as the new director of operations, someone better aligned with the company's evolving direction and core family values. Family values. The word choice hit harder than the lie. I read the memo again twice, then a third time, trying to silence the disbelief rising like a tide inside me. My departure wasn't just being rewritten. It was being cleansed of any trace of conflict, any trace of truth, any trace of me. I texted Jake, no reply. I called him, straight to voicemail. 3 days later, a Google alert I had set long ago pinged on my phone. The headline from a local business journal was impossible to miss. Legacy HVAC announces new direction under next-gen leadership. And there they were, smiling side by side in a glossy photo, my father and Jake holding oversized ribbon-cutting scissors in front of the newly renovated office. My old office, now bright open concept filled with standing desks and beanbags and bold colors, a perfect backdrop for the narrative they were building without me. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger at first, it was grief, a hollowing out the kind that follows betrayal too deep for immediate rage. I had given everything to that company, my childhood, my early adulthood, my sense of identity. To see it all repainted as if I had never existed was a new kind of heartbreak. But grief has a way of evolving if you let it sit. I needed clarity, not pity, so I began looking into things myself. I remembered a cloud backup system I had set up during my second-year external, rarely used, and easy to forget about. I logged in expecting it to be disabled or wiped. It wasn't. The screen populated instantly with folders I recognized intimately: invoices, client renewal logs, performance metrics, proposal drafts, supplier agreements. All the work I had built structured and refined. What I found inside made my confusion curdle into something sharper. Client renewals were dropping at a speed that didn't make sense. Inventory costs were rising again far above what I had negotiated. Recurring clients I personally managed were suddenly marked as inactive. The structure I had spent years stabilizing was unraveling quickly and publicly. Then one document pulled my attention in like gravity, a list of recently terminated employees. 4 names jumped out. Not mediocre workers or problem employees. These were the backbone of the operational systems I had built, people who understood the structure better than anyone because they helped me create it. Each of them had been terminated within weeks of each other. The status column beside their names contained just one word: exited. I reached out to all 4 privately. They responded almost immediately. Each story mirrored the next. They had been cornered, pressured, or subtly threatened to leave. They were told they were too tied to old processes, or that leadership wanted voices without prior loyalties. The implication was unmistakable. They were loyal to me, and that loyalty was suddenly a liability. My father wasn't just removing me, he was clearing out anything and anyone that reminded him of me. But the final break came when Sophia emailed me again. No explanation this time, just a screenshot. It was from an internal Slack leadership channel, anonymously forwarded. My father had typed, "We are no longer referring to Laurie in client interactions. If anyone asks, say she was a junior operations consultant, not family. Her recent initiatives were mostly Jake's ideas anyway. Keep the messaging consistent." I stared at the words, rereading them until my eyes blurred. Not family. The erasure wasn't only professional, it was personal. He was rewriting the last 27 years of my life into something smaller, insignificant, forgettable. This wasn't disappointment. This wasn't frustration. This was deliberate. This was a man cutting away anything he felt threatened his narrative of being the sole architect of the company, of his legacy. Instead of breaking, something inside me clicked into place. A quiet, focused click like gears aligning after years of grinding. The kind of shift that doesn't come from anger, but from clarity. I opened a new folder on my computer and titled it Rebuild. Inside it, I began sorting everything I knew. Clients I had brought in, vendors I had negotiated with, systems I had designed, employees I trusted, competitors whose weaknesses I knew, my strengths, my gaps, the entire industry landscape. I mapped out each piece like a strategist preparing for a long, deliberate game. I didn't start this out of revenge. At first, I simply wanted to understand who I was outside of his shadow. But the more I pieced together the patterns, the more I realized my father hadn't just underestimated me. He had built an empire, assuming I would never be anything without him. And he had pushed me out, believing I would fall apart. He had no idea what I was capable of without him. The first call I made was to Amira, one of the sharpest back-end schedulers I had ever worked with. She answered on the first ring. When I told her what I was thinking, she didn't hesitate even a second. "Tell me where and when," she said. "I've been looking for a way out. I'll follow you." Her certainty lit something warm in my chest. Next was Darren, our lead field technician. Steady experience, deeply respected by the crew. I barely finished explaining before he said he was in. "If you're building something new, I want to be part of it." Then I called Sophia, then Marta, then Jamal, the young technician I had taken under my wing. Within 2 weeks, I had 6 people. No office, no equipment, no real capital, but I had something far more important: loyalty, competence, and shared purpose. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing my father's approval. I was building something of my own, and I wasn't afraid. We didn't have a name at first. We didn't have an office or a clear roadmap or even a reliable coffee machine. What we had was a handful of people who trusted me enough to follow me into uncertainty, and after everything I'd just lived through, that alone felt like a kind of miracle. The first week, we huddled around mismatched laptops in Amira's living room, brainstorming what this new venture could be. Not another HVAC company. We didn't have the capital or the equipment for that, and truthfully, I didn't want to replicate anything from my father's world. I wanted to build something cleaner, smarter, more scalable. Something where the work I did carried my own name instead of someone else's. What eventually emerged was an operations consultancy focused on helping service companies streamline their systems. Dispatching, scheduling, inventory, management, subcontractor, coordination. All the things I had quietly mastered behind the scenes at Legacy HVAC. It felt natural in a way that surprised me. Like all this time, I had been preparing for something I didn't realize I was capable of creating. We filed for an LLC and named it Atlas Solutions, a name that made me think of someone holding up a world that was never built for them, but doing it anyway. Work came slowly at first. One of our first clients was a small roofing business I'd met the previous year at a networking event. They remembered me as the girl who actually answered emails, which was apparently rarer in this industry than it should be. We met them at a noisy cafe on the edge of town. I laid out what we could do: revamp their scheduling, renegotiate their supply costs, help their technicians avoid double bookings that were killing their margins. They signed a 2-month contract on the spot. Not a huge win, but a start. And a start felt like oxygen. Then came a plumbing company whose owner had nearly cried from frustration when describing his chaotic invoicing system. Then a landscaping business drowning in late appointments and customer complaints. Every small contract felt like proof that I wasn't wrong to walk away, or rather that I wasn't wrong to be shoved out and choose not to crawl back. Atlas Solutions grew in the most unglamorous ways. Hours spent in coffee shops, Zoom meetings with low-resolution cameras, spreadsheets that stretched long into the night. We rented a small space in a co-working building, a 2-room corner suite that smelled faintly like burnt espresso and existential dread. The paint was peeling near the baseboards, but it was ours. Jamal found a used espresso machine at a yard sale for $50, insisting it would change morale. He was right. Somehow, having a communal machine, even one that sputtered like it was dying, made us feel like a real company. With each passing month, our work got cleaner faster, more recommended. Clients were shocked at how quickly we made things run smoother. They weren't used to someone translating logistics into plain language instead of corporate jargon. They weren't used to someone who actually listened. And I wasn't used to people looking at me and seeing capability instead of inconvenience. By the end of month 3, we had 5 contracts. By month 4, 12. Around that time, I got forwarded an RFP document from one of our new clients, a commercial cleaning company. Apparently, Legacy HVAC was offering them discounted bundled services if they switched their ventilation subcontractor. It wasn't unusual. My father had always enjoyed poaching smaller companies by dangling bulk contracts like bait. But the client wrote something that caught me off guard. We figured we'd ask your opinion first. You've been more responsive in 3 weeks than they were in 10 years. I stared at the message, unsure how to feel. It wasn't that my father was undercutting us that was expected. It was that he didn't know I was the one behind Atlas Solutions. Our branding kept me off the front-facing materials on purpose. After the way he had erased me from Legacy HVAC, it felt poetic to build something quietly without giving him the satisfaction of seeing my name attached to it. Still, that email made something shift inside me, not anger, but realization. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving outside my father's orbit. I was outrunning him. Around then, I started doing small things for myself again. I took early morning runs, breathing in air that didn't smell like office carpets and stale coffee. I reached out to old college friends and actually found myself laughing, real laughter, not the brittle kind you force at company dinners. Max, one of my friends from business school, helped design a proper website for Atlas Solutions. Another friend connected me with a local entrepreneurship podcast. At first, I declined. The idea of talking publicly about my work, or worse, about my past, felt too raw. But then something inside me nudged forward. If I didn't speak up, my father's version of events would continue to dominate. And I was tired of silence, tired of invisibility, tired of being edited out of my own life. I didn't name Legacy HVAC in the interview. I didn't talk about my father. I simply said that I had spent years behind the scenes helping a service company grow, that I had been pushed out by people who couldn't see my value, and that I realized the only way to build something meaningful was to stop asking for permission. I talked about Atlas Solutions, about what we were trying to create, about building systems that made businesses smoother, not more complicated. The episode aired 2 weeks later, and I didn't think much of it. But apparently the industry did. My inbox flooded with messages. Small companies wanting help. Former colleagues whispering support, strangers. Thanking me for speaking about something they were too afraid to put words to. The response humbled me more than I expected. For so long I had believed my voice didn't matter. That belief had been taught to me, drilled into me, reinforced every time my father dismissed my ideas. But listening to that interview made people feel seen. And for the first time, I felt seen too. A week after the podcast went live, a regional developer reached out. They were working on a chain of medical office buildings and needed someone to coordinate logistics across multiple subcontractors. We met in a modern office with floor-to-ceiling windows and too much natural light. I expected them to turn me down. Instead, they signed a 6-month contract on the spot. We finally had something permanent, a strong, steady client with real stability attached. We moved into a slightly larger office, painted the walls ourselves, upgraded from second-hand desks to third-hand desks, which in our world was upward mobility. Everything felt like forward motion until one night my phone buzzed with a familiar name. An old warehouse worker from Legacy HVAC texted me, "Dude, it's falling apart over here." At first I assumed it was exaggeration. Then another message followed, "Jake just quit. Yelling match with your dad." Whole field team walked out. I called Sophia immediately. She answered breathlessly as if she'd been waiting for my call. "Laurie, it's bad. Half the technicians left after unpaid overtime. Bonuses didn't go through. Your father hired some consultant from out of state who has no idea what he's doing. Everything's breaking. I sat down slowly, letting the weight of her words settle. Jake was gone. The field team was gone. Systems were collapsing. On some level, I should have felt satisfaction, validation, triumph. But all I felt was a quiet, unsettling heaviness. Because despite everything he had done, a part of me still wanted my father to succeed or at least survive. But that part of me was shrinking, and the part that remembered being erased was growing louder. Word traveled faster than I expected. Within a week of the first messages, I began hearing pieces of legacy HVACs unraveling from nearly every direction. A vendor mentioned delayed payments. A former technician sent a voice note describing chaotic dispatching and equipment shortages. Even clients I no longer worked with hinted carefully that something was off over there. But I wasn't celebrating, not yet. The collapse of legacy HVAC didn't feel like a victory. It felt like standing outside a burning house that had once been my home, knowing I hadn't lit the match, but also knowing I was no longer running inside to put out the flames. Still, there was a clarity growing inside me. I had built systems that held that company together. I had managed clients, vendors, employees, workflows. I knew where the weaknesses were. I knew which pressure points my father relied on without ever noticing the hands actually holding them in place. None of this was about revenge at first. It was simply recognition the house he built wasn't as strong as he believed. It had only stood tall because I had been inside propping up the walls. I didn't plan to do anything with that knowledge, not until Harold called. Technically, he didn't call me. I reached out first. Mr. Harold ran a chain of assisted living centers across 3 states. He was meticulous, demanding, and fiercely loyal once you earned his trust. During my last year at Legacy HVAC, I had personally driven across state lines to fix a ventilation failure at one of his facilities because no one else was available. He never forgot that. I emailed him requesting a lunch meeting. When I arrived at the steakhouse, Harold stood up the moment he saw me. His smile was warm, almost relieved. "Well now," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I figured it was only a matter of time before you did something on your own." I blinked, unsure what he meant. He chuckled. "Word gets around, Laurie. Always admired your work. Legacy. Well, things have been shaky. But you, I always thought they didn't deserve." I felt something tighten in my throat, something like gratitude mixed with old ache. I told him about Atlas Solutions, what we were building, how we were leaner and more efficient than Legacy had ever allowed me to be. I talked about our early wins, our systems, our approach to transparency. Harold didn't even open the menu. "Send me a proposal," he said. "Legacy has botched the last 2 maintenance cycles. I gave them time to adjust, but it's clear the wrong people are in charge now." His confidence stunned me. All those years I'd been treated like a liability within my own family's company. Yet outside of it, people saw my work plainly without the distortion. I sent the proposal that night. 2 days later, Harold signed a full-service contract with Atlas Solutions. It wasn't just business, it was symbolic. Legacy HVAC had just lost one of its keystone clients, and I had taken my first deliberate step. After that, the strategy became clearer. Not malicious, not dramatic, surgical. The first rule was silence. I called Sophia into the small glass-walled room we were using as a conference space. For the next few months, I told her we go quiet. No flashy posts, no big announcements. We build slowly, consistently, under the radar. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. And then we flipped the switch. I didn't have to explain the rest. Vendors were the next pressure point. Legacy. HVAC had always treated its vendors like disposable pieces, squeezed them for better pricing, threatened to switch suppliers, act superior. I knew exactly which vendors were fed up and which ones were waiting for a reason to jump ship. Within 6 weeks, I'd met privately with 5 of them. 3 switched to Atlas immediately. 1 asked for time. The 5th, an older man who supplied ductless systems, laughed so hard when I introduced myself that he nearly spilled his espresso. "You finally broke free of that lunatic," he said. "Tell me what you need." We secured preferential pricing that undercut Legacy's rates by 15%. More importantly, we paid invoices on time, sometimes early. That alone earned us more goodwill than any contract negotiation ever could. Word spread through that vendor network faster than any marketing campaign. Meanwhile, I reached out to people still working inside Legacy. I wasn't trying to poach them. I just listened, let them tell me what had changed, what was breaking down, what they feared. I didn't push anyone. But whenever one of them whispered that things were getting unbearable, I offered a simple message. When you're ready, there's a seat at our table. No pressure, just purpose. Some thanked me quietly and stayed in touch. Others sent me documents, unpaid invoices, screenshots, even audio files of meetings where my father berated the staff and blamed the consultant he'd hired for every failure. I kept everything, not as blackmail, but as insurance, receipts, truth. Around then, an opportunity dropped into my inbox that made everything still for a moment. The state released an enormous RFP for infrastructure overhauls across dozens of public buildings, including HVAC modernization. A multi-million-dollar contract requiring an outside operations consultant. Atlas Solutions specialized in exactly that. I spent 4 days drafting the proposal from scratch: implementation plans, sustainability metrics, labor projections, risk mitigation. Sophia and Amira proofread every detail. We submitted just before the deadline. Legacy HVAC submitted too. I knew they would. A week later, I got the call. Atlas Solutions had made it to the final round. Legacy HVAC hadn't even made the shortlist. For the first time, I felt the full shift in momentum. The industry was watching. People who had underestimated me for years were starting to whisper the truth. Whatever Atlas Solutions was, it was real and it was growing fast. And still, my father didn't reach out. But someone else did. A small envelope arrived at our office one morning. No return address. My name printed neatly on the front. Inside was a letter from Jake. He apologized, not fully, not perfectly, but honestly enough to make me sit down as I read. He admitted my father wasn't well, that he'd stayed longer than he should have, that the company was crumbling because the man running it was determined to prove he never needed me. Laurie, the letter finished. I hope you're doing well. I heard you're making waves. You deserve it. It wasn't absolution, but it was closure. And that closure crystallized something in me. I had rebuilt my life. I had rebuilt my career. Now I was ready to rebuild the truth. It was time to stop being quiet. Time to stop letting my father control the narrative. Time to speak not for revenge, but for honesty. I reached out to the podcast host who had interviewed me before and asked if they wanted a follow-up episode. This time, I wouldn't hide names. I wouldn't soften details. I wouldn't protect someone who had never protected me. I wasn't going after Legacy HVAC. I was telling the truth about my life, and the truth was powerful enough to burn down the lies on its own. The podcast episode went live on a Thursday morning. By noon, my inbox was overflowing. Former coworkers reached out privately to say they finally felt seen. Vendors thanked me for acknowledging what they couldn't say publicly. A few competitors even emailed to say they admired my courage. And through it all, one message didn't arrive, the one from my father. At least not immediately. By that evening, the episode had spread far beyond our industry circles. I hadn't set out to destroy anything, but telling the truth clearly, calmly, and without embellishment had consequences. People listened. Legacy HVAC's reputation began to crack. 3 clients canceled within 48 hours. 1 vendor froze their contract. A former technician posted a long thread confirming everything I'd said and more. And still my father stayed silent. But the universe has a way of delivering messages when the timing is right. Late Sunday afternoon, as I was cleaning up our tiny Atlas Solutions office with Jamal, I saw an email notification with a sender name I hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. Subject: we need to talk. There was a strange sense of déjà vu. But unlike the last time he reached out when the email sat untouched for days, this time I opened it. My father wrote that my interview had hurt him deeply. He accused me of misrepresenting the company's history. He asked for a private meeting. He hinted lightly, strategically, that there were still ways we could work together. And then, as if he couldn't help himself, he ended with, "You're not my enemy, Laurie. You never were." No apology. No acknowledgement of firing me in front of a room full of people. No recognition of the erasure, the lies, the gaslighting. Just a man who finally realized he was sinking and reached for the nearest lifeline. I forwarded the message to my attorney with one sentence. This confirms he's aware of our operational overlap. Prepare phase 2. Because the truth was, I wasn't planning a truce. I was preparing a transition. Phase 2 had already begun weeks earlier. It wasn't a public attack. It was structural, strategic, precise. The same way I had quietly built Legacy HVAC's backbone for years, I was now carefully removing the pieces that allowed it to stand. The first move had been the building. Legacy HVAC had leased the same property for over a decade, but the owner was in financial trouble. A former client of mine, a real estate investor, acted as my proxy. We purchased the building outright below market value in cash. No one knew I was behind it. 3 weeks later, Legacy HVAC received a formal notice. Their lease was terminated. They had 60 days to vacate. I knew their cash flow couldn't support a relocation that fast. I knew their servers still ran on physical backups. I knew the upheaval would destabilize every workflow, and I knew my father would try to renegotiate. My property manager told him exactly what I wanted. The new owner isn't interested in tenants struggling with financial volatility. It was harsh, but it was true. The second move was recruitment, but not the aggressive kind companies use when they're desperate. Mine was quiet, thoughtful, and surgically timed. I designed minimalist flyers, just the Atlas Solutions logo and a single line, tired of being managed by chaos. Come build something better. A contact still inside Legacy helped distribute them. Under windshield wipers taped to break room vending machines slipped into tool bags. Within days, calls started pouring in. Not hesitant inquiries, full, desperate pleas for a way out. Some employees weren't just unhappy, they were burned out, humiliated, and ready to abandon ship. The third move was the Keystone client. Legacy's largest remaining contract, a multi-building commercial complex, had been neglected for months. Missed inspections, rude technicians, uncoordinated teams. The facility manager reached out to Atlas after hearing the podcast. She didn't even try to hide her frustration. I didn't pitch aggressively. I listened. Then I offered a transition so seamless, they wouldn't have to confront Legacy at all. They signed with us 1 week later. That single contract was the falling domino. Within days, Legacy laid off half their staff. Within weeks, 2 vendors filed lawsuits for unpaid invoices. Within a month, several former employees filed claims citing hostile work conditions. By the time a bankruptcy attorney emailed me listing Atlas Solutions as a competing creditor in a pending intellectual property dispute, I almost laughed. My father wanted to sue me for stealing the systems I built from scratch. We countered immediately, backed by timestamp source files and employee affidavits. The case dissolved faster than it formed. And then silence. Legacy HVAC officially shuttered 6 months later. The building was emptied, the signage removed, the website dark. Rumors circulated that my father moved out of state. Some said he was starting a consultancy. Others joked he wanted to run a podcast. No one really knew. No one was answering his calls anymore. The industry remembered him, but not fondly. Meanwhile, Atlas Solutions was thriving. We expanded into a larger building, open, bright, and intentionally collaborative. Every founding employee received stock options. We launched a mentorship program for young techs transitioning into operations. We partnered with trade schools. We sponsored conferences. We weren't just a business. We were a community, a culture, a movement built on everything my father had rejected: teamwork, transparency, respect. I never contacted him again, not because of hatred, but because of clarity. He had never been capable of seeing value in anything he didn't control. He had never understood that leadership wasn't domination, it was stewardship. And he had spent too many years mistaking fear for loyalty. My vengeance wasn't the collapse of his company. My vengeance was something far quieter, far stronger. I no longer needed him to validate that I had risen. And as I walked through the new Atlas Solutions office past the glass meeting rooms, the hum of collaboration, the whiteboards filled with ideas, I felt something settle in my chest that had been missing for years. Peace. He built a company, but I built a legacy, a real one that could stand without him.